Welcome to our webinar today, How to Create Your Leadership System. I'm Sean Mahoney. I'm the CEO and founder of Mahoney Performance Institute. And I look forward to sharing a tool with you that we think is one of the most critical tools that every manager needs. I want to thank you for joining us today. What we're going to end up doing is we're going to show you how to create your own leadership system. We think this is going to be useful for you whether you're leading a team of people for the first time, whether you're a first level manager, whether you've never had any formal training, or maybe you just need a refresher. I'm going to share a tool with you that I think is going to really help you define your leadership management system. A little later on in our program, what we're going to do after we take you through this worksheet, I'm going to email you a link to download the worksheet. And our goal is that you're going to turn around and you're going to begin using it tomorrow. That this is a tool that you're going to be able to use and put to work tomorrow. So let's talk a little bit about this struggle and the struggle that we're referring to, and why a leadership management system is important is because it's not easy leading and managing people. You got to know what to do, you got to know how to do it, you got to impress your boss. You know what's important for your team. However, you need to make sure that your team is getting more stuff done, and all of these things make it really difficult in terms of leading and managing people. Some years ago, I was leading a company through a dramatic turnaround. And what I found was that initially I was doing all the leading, but frankly I was getting burned out, having to make all the decisions, doing all the leading. So what I did instead was I decided that, what I need to do is I need to start promoting people, and I need to start putting people into first level leader and manager positions. However, they all struggled, and they struggled because although they were really good at doing individual work, they had never really been responsible for the work of others. Now, what I did realize at that point is that if I didn't solve this problem, we weren't going to start growing again. We couldn't just rely on me leading the people. And so then I had this aha moment, and this aha moment, my solution was to create a leadership program. What I realized is that I needed to get everyone speaking the same language. I wanted everyone to be more confident. I wanted them to be really successful. And so what I did was I reached out to several CEOs and other executive leaders that I knew and had crossed paths with over the years. And ultimately what I formed is a couple of focus groups. And those focus groups, when I brought them together, I asked them really to focus on one particular thing, which is what were the things that made good or great leaders successful. What are some of the lessons that they had learned over those years? And with all of those ideas in mind, what I ended up doing is I created a leadership system. What I ultimately realized was that they needed to create a leadership system for themselves, for their particular situation. That was the big idea that I stumbled across. And so what I created with this program is it really showed them what to do and how to do it. And ultimately what I challenged them to do through this program is to incorporate the things that made sense into their own system. Although I was going to present a lot of ideas and I was going to share a lot of things, the bottom line is your leadership system has to work for you, and it has to work for you in your particular situation. So let me talk a little bit about results. What happened was I put all of my first level managers through the program, and since then we've shared it with hundreds of other managers and other companies. And really through this program what we really focus on is for managers to learn what to do and how to do it. They learn how to create their own leadership system. And although this sounds like this was a situation where I created a program that worked in my turnaround situation, I promise you it can work for you too. It really did make leading easier for the members of my team. It's made leading easier for hundreds of other managers in other companies. And we've even seen a number of managers who've written us over the years where they were graduates of our program, and ultimately they moved on to become successful executive leaders. So what we're going to do today is we're going to share with you how to create your own leadership system. We're going to share with you and walk through what we call our Create Your Leadership System worksheet. I'm going to explain the process involved in creating your leadership system. I'm going to give you some advice for your situation. And although we can't go into tremendous detail today because we're going to keep this to about 30 minutes, What we really hope is we're going to give you enough information so that you can go back to your job and start working on this worksheet and applying this with your team immediately. Most importantly, we are going to share with you a little bit later on elements of this system and how the MPI's program to make leading easier can work for you. So why don't we get started? So this program that I put together all those years ago was what we really thought all of our managers really needed. And ultimately we boiled it down into 4 parts or 4 modules, with the idea being that these were really 4 key focus areas. So the first was about leading your team. This is all about inspiring and influencing others. Managing your team. That was all about, are you giving them the support that they need in order to get the right work done? Communicating with your team. That's all about messaging. It's all about sending the right messages and ultimately influencing behavior. And then the last one, the last module was about driving team execution, which was all about the consistency that's needed in order to deliver, consistent results. In this program, we cover lots of elements of leadership. We will give you somewhere between 5 and 6 tools every time we get together. And my emphasis originally was for the new managers. Like I said, I had a lot of young, inexperienced managers. However, we've found over the years that these concepts, these ideas, these worksheets are beneficial to many other people. I've even had a number of CEOs go through it and say, hey, this was a great refresher. This is something that I really, really needed. So when we talk about these different areas, leading your team, for example, this is where you're really responsible for the work of others. You need to inspire and influence people. And our emphasis there is really differentiating it from managing your team. Where managing your team is just as important as leading your team. We think both are important, and it really depends on your particular situation that you're up against. Do you have a large team that you're going to need to give more direction to in terms of getting the right things done? Or, is it really about direction? Is it really about inspiring people? And if so, it's more about leadership. But you're going to need both of them in your job as you move forward. Managing is really about getting the right work done, both efficiently and effectively. The third module, when we talk about communication, we emphasize that it's not just telling people what to do, that it really requires effective communication, and effective communication really is critical if you're going to be a great leader of people. We want to be able to influence them, and effective communication is going to be that primary tool. And then the last one, when we talk about driving team execution, this is about bringing it all together into a system and refining your practices ultimately into a system. So whether you're there or not, the show goes on, and that's a real important component of what we do. Now today, what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about one element of that last module. We're going to be talking about your system. We're going to be talking about how do we create a leadership system for you. And for that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through our Create Your Leadership System worksheet. This is honestly one of the best tools that we offer in our training programs. And so what we want to do is spend a few minutes on that for you. Now, why a system? What does a system do for you? Honestly, it gives you a guide for your management and leadership actions. So in other words, it keeps you on pace. It makes sure that you're thinking about the right management and leadership actions you need to take. It's also important because it helps you be consistent and clear. With a system, it will enable you to make sure that you're doing things in the right frequency, and you're being really consistent and clear with your team. Now, what we have in terms of this tool that we're going to share with you today is this is our Create Your Leadership System worksheet. And on page 1, you're going to see that there is a really good checklist. And this checklist is really driven around the process that you should go through when you're creating your own leadership management system. And we'll talk about this in a little bit, but this is a constant work in progress. So although you'll do the assessment initially, we really believe that you should continue to do it as well. Page 2 and 3, that's a handout, and that contains a a worksheet where you can really assess how well you're performing in those various areas. And then at the bottom of page 3, we'll actually have an area where you can write in the practices and the actions that you're going to take and will follow in order to really make sure that that consistency comes through. At the bottom of this, you'll see a list of practices, and then next to it, you'll see a list of activities that you will use to make those practices ultimately work for your team. So first, let's take a look more closely at the checklist on page number 1. As I said before, this is the sequence of actions or the 7-step process that we think is really critical if you're going to create your leadership system. I will emphasize step number 7, which is iterate to continually improve. That's an important part of the process, because although you go through it one time's not enough. You may have a change in responsibilities, etc. And whenever those things happen, what we want to do is make sure that we go back and we iterate, go through the same process. So step 1 in the process is really about assessing your current leadership practices. This is where we want you to do a self-assessment. We think it's really important to figure out what's important and how are you performing in those particular areas. And this starts as part of the worksheet starting on page number 2. So when we send you the link for the download, you're going to be going to page number 2. But what I'd like to do at this point is just walk you through it and give you an idea of how you're going to use this worksheet. So let's take a look at the various categories or leadership practices. There's 5 categories of practices. Each one of these 5 areas really represent what you're going to do as a leader. Whereas when you start to look at the management practices themselves, that's how you will do it as a leader. And we think both of these things are important. So let's walk through each of these categories and maybe give you a little better sense of how you would rate it. So the first category is about knowing your team. This is about establishing strong relationships with your team. The idea is that if you're going to lead people effectively, you've got to be able to really build relationships with them, understand where they're coming from, etc. The second area that we're going to focus on, or category, is setting priorities and expectations. So how are you doing with your team in terms of setting priorities and making sure that everyone knows what's important? The third category is preparing your team. Are you doing a good job preparing your team to get work done? Would you benefit from that? That's what we want to explore in that category. Then the importance of guiding and coaching your team. How good are you at guiding and coaching your team? How much benefit would the team get at you focusing in that particular area? And then the last one is keep improving. So do you have practices in place that enable you to keep improving? So now let's go back to the first step in our process. And what we would like you to do when you get your worksheet a little bit later on in this presentation is we'd like to show you how to use this worksheet. So the first thing that we're going to want to do here is we're going to want to rate the impact. And rating the impact is a really important part of this, because this is where you're going to look at each one of these practices and you're going to say, how big of an impact could that have on my team now? If you feel like it would have very little impact, you'd rate it a 1. If you think it would be very impactful, you'd rate it a 7, or anywhere in between. And so rating the impact is really the first step in our process. Then what we want you to do is we want you to rate your performance. So how good are you doing right now? How do you feel you're performing in that particular area? So for example, in this one where we said identifying communication styles of you and your team and others, how are you doing with that? If you feel like you're doing very poorly, you'd give it a 1. If you feel like you're doing very well, you'd give it a 7. And then obviously there's a lot of ratings in between. So this range of values is really important because, you know, ultimately what we want to see are what items are going to stand out. And so what we want to do is we want to share with you, this is what we would consider an example worksheet. And really what we're looking for is we're looking at the impact and we're looking at the performance values. And this just happens to show one person's performance areas. Let's assume that it's me. So what we want to look at is where's the impact highest, and you can see in this particular area that impact was really high under identifying communication styles of you and your team and others. You can see that building a game plan, we think that there'd be a huge impact related to that. And then you can see a little bit farther down, building trust across the team. We feel like those are real high impact areas. And this is going to become really important. So step number 2 in the process ultimately is what we want to do is we want to rate our impact by calculating the gaps. So what we're doing here in this process is what we want to look at is we want to say where are the biggest gaps for each practice area that you've identified, and you calculate the gap ultimately. It's impact minus performance. So if you've rated the impact as being very high, let's just say at a 7, and your performance was a 1, the gap would be pretty large. And those are the things that we're trying to identify. So let me show you again another example of this. Here's an example with the gaps all filled in. And what you're looking at, and let's again assume this is me, is that there's a pretty high impact in the area of communication styles, because we said that there's a high impact of 7. There's a performance, I would rate myself a 3, and so the gap becomes a 4. And really what we're trying to do is identify what are the biggest gap areas, because they represent the most important. And so what we're going to want to do is we're going to go through each one of those. You can see that in the case of capture and prepare your leadership stories, honestly, we didn't see it as being very impactful, and we didn't see us as performing very well. But the bottom line is it wasn't a huge gap. And you can see in the case down below where we talk about taking control to build their confidence in you, is that we think we're pretty good at that, but we don't think the impact is that great. So it's actually a -2. So what we're really looking for in these areas is that we ultimately want to choose, 2 or 3 of the most impactful areas that we can get to, and those impactful practices are where the gap is greatest. And you're going to want to focus on the practices where you feel like you can make the greatest impact. You're also going to want to focus on where you have the biggest gaps. And so here again in the worksheet, you can see what we've identified. What we've identified is that in this particular instance is that there was a 7 for impact and a 1 for performance in the area of using regular accountability reviews and reinforcement. So there's a huge gap there, and so we're really looking at that as being one of those highlighted areas. And it's such a big gap that ultimately we're probably going to want to address that in some form or fashion. However, there may be areas also in your gap where you're already doing a really, really good job, and ultimately you're successful. So what we want to do is look at those as they're probably already incorporated into each one of the focus areas. So step number 4 is we want to go through and document how we're going to handle each one of these practices. What we want to do is in column number 1, we want to highlight what is the practice area in the first column of the system. And then number 2, what we want to highlight is we want to talk about what are the actions that we're actually going to put in place to execute that practice. And so we find that if you put these down, these really become the ingredients in your leadership system. Step number 5 is we need to share. Ultimately, we need to share this with our team. If you don't communicate your system, people don't know what to expect, and really the system will bring a lot of clarity to your organization. So you're only as good as your communication of it. And so we start, this is our recommendation, is that we think you should start by discussing this with your boss. A couple things happen is that they see that you are committed to it. They see you as being a proactive leader. And at the same time, they usually have some thoughts. Maybe there's some other things that they think you should incorporate into your system. And then secondly, I would share it with my team. I'd want to bring clarity to them and tell them what are some of the things that are important that we're going to be focused on. I think these were all great things from a communication standpoint. Step number 6 is implementing your system. This is where you're going to put your system in place. You're going to document it. You're going to refer to it daily. You want to make sure that you're being consistent with it and your commitment to it. And this is the system that ultimately is going to guide all your leadership actions, over the next few months. And then lastly, you're going to refine and expand your system as needed. So we're recommending that after the first 3 months, you go back through this checklist again and see how you're doing, and are there some other things that you've learned about yourself, learned about your team that you need to incorporate into your leadership system. You may have learned some new things or new practices that you're going to need to incorporate. But this is your 7-step process. So now we've reviewed the worksheet with you, so let's start to create your own leadership system. We've talked a lot about why a system will help you. We've talked how you would create your system. So what we're going to do now is we're going to forward to you an email, which is going to be a link to download a copy. And really what we'd like you to do is we'd like you to spend some time right away to identify the 3 to 5 things that you're going to incorporate into your leadership system. We think that the tool that we shared with you today ultimately will help you put it to use, and that ultimately you can improve your leadership management system starting tomorrow. Now, hopefully you see that having a leadership system can be really powerful, it can be very helpful. It can create that consistency with your team that you're looking for. It shows everyone, including your supervisor, that you're very organized, that you're thoughtful, that you're sincere. If you're interested in working more directly with me and the MPI team, I want to show you how you can do that. Ultimately, we have a program called Make Leading Easier. This is a program where we use books, we use videos, we use checklists, worksheets, etc. To help you explore what you will really create or ultimately incorporate into your leadership management system. What I wanted to do is spend a few minutes with you now to tell you a little bit more about it, walk you through the content and the resources. And if it is of interest, we'd love for you to join us on that journey. So everything that you want to know or about our program, you can get at www.managersmarket.com. That's our website, and you can see the link up above. This is an area where you can certainly get lots of detailed information, but what I want to do is I want to give you a real quick summary now. So there are 4 modules that we have in our Make Leading Easier program. The first module is about leading your team, and here we're going to talk about how do you inspire and how do you ultimately influence others. We're going to talk about, in this particular module, we're going to talk about preparing to lead. We're going to be talking about clarifying your mission. We're going to be talking about developing a game plan that will really help you make an impact with your team. And then ultimately we're going to talk about decision making and how do you make effective decisions. One of the things that we have found time and time again is that every leadership system needs a game plan, and so that is one of those highlights in this particular module. You'll walk away with a game plan, something that's really specific in terms of what you want to accomplish. It'll be very clear about who's got the ball and what is the sequencing of those activities, and so we think you'll really benefit from that here. Our second module is about managing your team. This is about getting the right work done, and what we cover here is assessing your team, building your team, supporting your team. How do you ultimately build a plan to manage your team? And there are a number of great worksheets that you will get with this, but one of the things that we know is really important, and I emphasized earlier, is getting to know your team. And so under management, if you're going to effectively manage people, they need to feel as though they know you. And so we spend a lot of time in Module 2 understanding how do you really get to know your team. The third module is about communicating with your team. Here we talk about so many great things. This is, in my mind, one of the most important things that you will gain from this program is understanding the difference of communication styles and how do you adjust your communication style to your audience. How do you get others to hear your ideas? How do you handle team situations and challenges? So we walk through a lot of situationals. We walk through a lot of one-on-one situations. So those are discussions that you will have with people on your team. One of the big areas in this particular module is really understanding the different communication styles. We find that when there's problems between you and maybe one of your subordinates, a lot of it could go back to communication styles, so understanding yours and theirs is really, really important. The fourth module is about driving team execution. This is all about taking control of your team. This is about motivating your team. Accountability is something that a lot of managers struggle with, and we talk about a system for driving accountability. And then creating your own leadership system. So what's a little different between what we discussed today, we only had a little bit of time to cover some of the ground on creating your own leadership system. But in effect, all of these modules identify ideas and opportunities to incorporate certain things into your leadership management system. In terms of execution, we find that the system is really the centerpiece, and it's something that you will take from all the modules. So again, if you need more details, make sure that you go to www.managersmarket.com/MLE. There you'll have all the information you could possibly want to know about our program. A couple other things that I just wanted to mention that you will get as part of our Make Leading Easier program. Each module you'll be reading and reviewing, books, articles, things of that nature. We're going to use some great videos to present the ideas and practices. You're going to get tools, at least 5 of them, each and every time we get together in each module. We're going to incorporate virtual live Q&A sessions, which we've found to be very, very powerful. And then ultimately we're going to have a discussion forum that you can participate with on a regular basis and ultimately interact with a number of our professors. So we feel like this is a very rich program. We hope you give it some consideration. And again, if you have any questions, you can certainly go to our website. So if you're interested in working with me to make leading easier, you can join us now. If you really prefer to work more at your own pace, this is really a self-study program. You can move along at your own pace, whatever works for you, and you can start this program right now. And for those of you that are interested, we want to give you a bonus opportunity, which is the first 30 to register. We're going to give you book summaries on all the books that we're going to cover. We think that this could potentially save you time. But ultimately it's just really good at highlighting some of the key points along the way. Some people have asked us in the past of how do you actually register for the program? How do you get started? Again, I would go to www.managersmarket.com/MLE, and there you can see the different options. Here's the payment mechanism. Option number 1, the self-study program, largely is $897. It's a one-time payment, or you can opt for a payment plan as well. What I wanted to make all of you aware of too is our guarantee. From our standpoint, we want you to not only be happy, but we want you to be effective. And so we provide a guarantee where if for whatever reason this is not working for you, you have until the start of module number 2 where you can opt out. And if you opt out, just send us a simple email saying this program's not working for me, no questions asked. Although we would love to get some feedback from you as to why it didn't work. But then we would give you back your money 100% guaranteed. So I don't want you to feel as though you're locked into something, you're not really sure whether it's going to work or not. We just want it to be effective for you. So that's really important that we share with you about that guarantee. So here's how you actually would go through the actual sign-up process if you decide that you want to move forward. is that you'd go again to managersmarket.com/MLE. This is where you can find all the details. You would scroll down the web page and you're going to click on the green button that matches your preferred program. Again, the first 30 to register get a bonus. I really look forward to working with some of you. I'm hopeful all of you join us. But check out our page, info@mahoneyperformanceinstitute.com, if you do have any other questions that you haven't thought about. I hope you've enjoyed our webinar, and I hope that you have a very prosperous week. And if you're interested in joining us, boy, we'd love to have you on this journey. Thank you.